Hello, my name is Guilherme and I help engineers to be high-performing project managers. Even if you're starting now, even if you don't have experience with project management, even if you want to move from engineering career to a project management career. This content is part of the warm-up for the project management journey. The project management journey, it's a one-week event that I'm going to make where I'm going to talk about the steps that you need to further develop a career into project management. So if you're interested in that, click in the link here in the bio and subscribe. The event is free and the content will only be available that week. So make sure you get it. Today I'm going to talk about Scrum, but I'm also want to talk about a bit different perspective on Scrum. I'm not going to talk about framework, the roles, artifacts, and so on, but I'm going to talk about why Scrum is so valuable and why it can create so much value, and how also you can understanding this value behind of Scrum and why it was created. You also can understand how you can apply this value in any type of project that you are working on. So this is something quite important. Well, first of all, just a short background. Of course, Agile, it's the big group there. Agile, it evolved kind of from Lean. Of course, you can see some discussions on the internet, but I'm following here what's also on the PM block, but I'm also following what is on the Scrum.org, and also I believe on that's 100%. So the entire Agile, it's kind of evolution from a bit of the Lean philosophies there, and then tailor-made for projects, of course. And Scrum, it's one framework under the Agile umbrella. So Scrum is following 100% of the Agile Manifesto, and it's 100% aligned with 12 principles on the Agile Manifesto. Scrum is based on the empirical theory plus again lean management, Toyota model, whatever you want to call it. And this is Scrum. It's also it's a framework, but it's intended not to be a completed framework with extensive description, what people should do, assuming that of course people will learn and also will use the framework they have to build something even better. But to the point, why Scrum is so valuable? Well, one of the first things is of course the focus on value. If you know a bit of the Scrum, you know that you have your product backlog with all the requirements that you know for your product or service or whatever you're developing at any given point in time for the project. And of course, this backlog is prioritized, and the top items and the top value items they are added to be executing in a sprint. And the product owner, he or she, they are the responsible to prioritize this backlog. That's why you also can see the product owner as a value optimizer. You're going to hear a lot this value optimizer if you're studying to the PSM exam or for the PSPO from the Scrum.org. But okay, value optimizer. What does it mean that you're a value optimizer? Basically, if I change a bit the wording there, someone that's doing a value optimizing, what you're doing, you're using Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, meaning that you are focused on the items that can produce the biggest outcome. Then of course, if you are doing this in a proper way, if you are doing that in the right framework, you're always focusing the value. And again, when you're talking about value, it can be value for the customer, but also value for the company, or value for the project itself on items that needs to be solved to mitigate risks and so on. So the product owner should have this understanding. Why I'm saying that the Pareto framework, because if you have been following me for a while, you probably have seen me talking about that if you have a good understanding on your project and the project boundaries and constraints around that, So you need, if you use properly Pareto, then of course you are optimizing the value from what you're doing, because you're always focused in items that can bring the most positive impact for the project. So being a value optimizer, it's really really focus on Scrum for the product owner. Of course, the product owner takes the, or at least he or she should take input from several different parts, also to understand what's more valuable or what's not. But that's something that you can use 100% in any project, because if you are focusing on the value, then you're focusing, and if you're using Pareto, then you are looking to optimize the value of your project. Then that's one of the things why Scrum brings so much value, because usually if you're working a big project, you have maybe hundreds or maybe thousands of requirements or testings to do. And of course, you need prioritization and a good decision making process. And that's why Scrum is so nice and so valuable, because if you're putting yourself in this framework, you're always focusing the most important things that needs to be done. Again, the product owner main job is focusing optimizing value, and how he's doing that, he's prioritizing and deciding based on requirements and constraints for the entire project, that they are there, everything that needs to be done in the project, it's in the product backlog. The second point, why Scrum is so valuable, is the shorter feedback loops from customers or from markets. What does that mean? It means that you are going to build something, instead of you work months to build something, to develop something, and then collecting feedback to see if you get the requirements right, if that's what they really need, if the need is still there. You can cut it off and do it in sprints. One sprint should take, if you're following a Scrum framework, it should take between 1 week or 4 weeks. So instead of working for months, you're going to take that in a matter of weeks. You're going to be able to collect feedback, and that's very important, because here it can be, even a lot of things can change. Requirements can change, the market needs can change, the market situation can change, competition can change, and so on. So having those shorter periods is very helpful to confirm that you are in the right path, but also to confirm if you're in the wrong path, you have time to minimize your loss and to correct your route. Because that's why when you look about when you look on the Scrum framework, you see a lot about inspection and adaptation. It goes like, you need to have transparency, because transparency enables inspection, and if you have an inspection, that enables you to adapt. And that's the entire idea, that you're in a situation, you're in a very complex environment with a lot of things changing, and if you have shorter periods of time that you can collect feedback, you can make sure that you're always making adjustments for the route. It's kind of, if you're making like a long road trip, I don't know, 1,000 kilometers, every, I don't know, 50 kilometers, you're checking if you're in the right route, or you can do it whatever distance. But it's important to check you're in the right route, not to just ride 1,000 kilometers to see, oh, I'm going the wrong direction. That's what you do with those short feedback loops, and that's quite important. And here you're going to see, you can have like the lean startup, lean enterprise, but idea it's always the same. It's always, and also when you talk about design thinking, you have some MVP, minimum viable proposition, and you want to try it, and you want to test it, and you want to collect this feedback loop as fast as possible. Why? Because if it's good, you can build on that to get something to the market faster. Or if it's bad, you might decide to kill the project, or you can adjust the route and you understand what's bad and you can fix it. So Those shorter feedback loops, it's quite important. But that's also something that you can use as much as possible in all types of projects, including waterfall. One example here, maybe, for example, if you're working to construction, a lot of times, or most of the times, the construction projects they are still following waterfall. But in the construction, you have, for example, the design phase, which is a very critical phase for everything else that you're going to do in the project, not only for construction. Of course, the design phase it's important for any type of product or service development or anything that you're doing. But in the construction phase, if you're building a house, instead of making a full design for the entire house with all the details, electrical, hydraulic, and everything else, and show it to the customer to see if they like it or not, you can also break it down in smaller pieces. First, you work in the architecture project, then you check with the customer. That's what you want before starting develop all those design. And of course, here it's a very simple example, but in all types of construction project, you can try to have those shorter cycles, those shorter feedback loops to make sure that your design is going to the right direction. And again, some stuff might be very difficult to break down in a couple of weeks or even in a month. But you can look for ways to implement those feedback loops because that will bring value for your project. And I understand depending what you're doing and the type of project that you're working. If you're looking for a physical prototype might take you few months to make sure that you can be available depending on the type of material, depending on the complexity of the product, and so on. And some other prototypes you can build depending also if what you're doing. Maybe you can 3D print in the same day, but some other will need some weeks. But shorter the period you can have to have those trials and those checks, it's better. And again, in the construction, usually you have those checks because if you are working on a big construction site, before like concrete the big foundation, you're going to have some inspection to make sure that the steel inside it, everything is okay. And what's that? It's a checkpoint. It's a feedback loop. Why? Because if you concrete something and then you figure out later on that something is missing or it breaks it, it will be much more expensive. Then you can think in a lot of different feedback loops that you can add in your project. And here again, I understand that sometimes you have time constraints, you had other types of constraints like the customer relationship, the type of contract, what you're doing. But what you as a project manager need to understand is understand your context, your constraints, your boundary conditions, and see how you can implement those feedback loops there in order to bring value for you. This is what's important. And in Scrum, in this case, it's so important because every sprint you have the opportunity to inspect and adapt. And of course, you do that during the entire sprint, but you also have the rituals in the end, like the sprint review and the sprint retrospective, because it's quite important that you build, that you make sure that you have a feedback loop to make sure you can make corrections if it's needed. And the third point that I would like to mention why Scrum is so valuable is if you look for the framework, how it's developed and the focus on the values and everything else, you can see that basically the goal there is to make sure that you can develop a high-performing leader, or you can develop high-performing leadership and high-performing teams. Because I bet whatever you're doing, whatever your industry, whatever the project management framework you have, if you have a high-performing team and a high-performing leader, the chances that you're going to succeed are much higher. And that's why it's so nice, because Scrum is focusing on that when they talk about the values of the Scrum. It's focusing on that when they have a specifically sprint retrospective, so the team can reflect on what they are doing and then understand how they can improve as a team. That's why you talk about empowering your team members. That's why you talk about the The respect for people. By the way, respect for people that also comes a lot from the Lean philosophy. And those things, they are going to give you an advantage in the long run because you are developing your team members, you are developing your people, you're making sure that they are working well as a team, and that can give you a really big competitive advantage there. But of course, I've already mentioned this already a few times. If you have been following me for a while, you know that if you want to be a high performing team, any high performing team, they also should have the same values as you have in the Scrum Guide. Because you cannot have a high performing team if you don't have courage, if you don't have transparency, if people do not trust each other, you're not going to have a high performing team. If people do not feel empowered, if they are not feeling responsible for the work to be done there, it does not exist this idea that a project manager will just say to everyone what they should do it, when they should do it, and how they should do it. If you think that project management is like that, I can tell you you're seeing it in the wrong way. And here I'm not talking about only Scrum. It's about everything that's leadership. What's a true leader? Nowadays, the Scrum Guide, it calls it a true leader. In the past was the servant leader. What's a true leader? It's recognize that you need to empower your team because your team, they need to understand the value that you are doing. They need to understand the why. They need to come up with the solutions. They need to work together to overcome challenges. And you are not going to be able to do that if you're just trying to be the old school boss. That's not work. And those 3 points that bring so much value to Scrum, you can use basically everywhere. That's also why I always suggest and I always tell people that you should understand the different frameworks, because more you understand on those different project management frameworks, you talk about waterfall, you talk about agile, then you can talk about Scrum, you can talk about Kanban, lean management, Lean Six Sigma, because when you start to study all those different perspectives and you start to make those connections, it helps you to understand how to move forward. And again, the project management principles here, that's why you see the PMBOK 7 edition, they are talking about project management principles there, because the project management principles, they are universal, they can be used in any type of framework. And of course, I mentioned the 3 items that bring so much value to Scrum because they are important, and that, in a bit of my perspective, they bring there the heart of the Scrum, and that's the heart of that will bring you a lot of value. And why I'm saying that, because the same way that you can see people working with waterfall thinking that their job is to execute the 49 process they have in the PMBOK 6th edition, step by step, executing the paperwork without thinking about why, without thinking about doing, just say, I'm checking the box, I'm doing everything here. You also have people that doing Scrum, that they have their roles, they have the artifacts, they have the events, and they do everything by the book, but they forget why the value is there. If you have a product owner that does not understand that he's a value maximizer and that he also needs to understand with a lot of different stakeholders, including customers, managers, the team members, getting input from a lot of things to understand what's failing, how he can maximize that, then how he can use Pareto to focus on the really important items. You just have a product owner that says, I'm the boss, I'm calling the shots. That's also not going to work. That's not going to bring you the value that you need for Scrum. So, executing all the rituals but without understanding why they're there, then you're doing just because it's nice. And in the end, no company in the world, they care if it's waterfall, if it's lean, if it's Scrum, or whatever you want to call it. You can bring every day there's a different agile, new agile framework there you're going to see. scaled agile, you can see enterprise agile, or whatever. Every day you're going to find a new term. In the end, your job, a company hire a person to solve a problem. How you're going to do it, it's less relevant if you cannot solve the problem. How you are doing it, it gets less relevant. So think about your job is to solve a problem. Your job is to add value for the company. Because of course the company needs that, but if you want to have a salary increase, how it works in a company, you need to add much more value than your cost. So the company can have a profit. Because if your cost is too high, the value that you add is too low, sooner or later you're going to be out of a job. So understanding that what you need to do there is much more than following the framework. You need to understand the value of what you are doing there. So executing Scrum without understanding the value of what you are doing there, like that's why it's also, of course, Scrum framework was entirely built to try to maximize how the process to people to deliver the value in the end. But the process by itself, it's useless if you focus only on the process and you forget about the value in the end. This again, it's valid for Scrum, but it's also valid for Waterfall. No one cares about a project manager that will say, I have all the 49 process from the PM Box's 6th edition here. I did my project plan. I have my project plan for the 10 different knowledge areas with those process groups. Like, no one cares if your project fails. No one cares that you did the 49 process. If a project is failing, no one cares that you are saying that but I'm doing my sprint retrospective. Yeah, but you need to bring value for the sprint retrospective, because if you have a meeting of 1 hour with zero value add, you're wasting people's time, and that's exactly the opposite that it's intended with those meetings there from Scrum. And basically it should be the exactly the opposite of any type of meeting that you have. You should have a meeting with a defined agenda that you have, that the idea is that you are going to bring some value for that this will bring some clarity. If you have a meeting that does not add any value at all, you probably should stop doing that. But that's a completely different discussion that we can have. And why again I'm talking about those three main points on Scrum? Because if you see that, and when you study the Scrum framework, it gets a bit easier to see, because Scrum it's a light framework. If you read the Scrum guide there's probably, I don't know, 14, 15 pages. So it's much easier to understand and to reflect, because the content is shorter. If you go for the PMBOK 6th edition, it's more than 600 pages. Then of course, understanding what's the core of 600 pages will take you much more work and much more effort than what's in the 14 pages. And again, if you read the Scrum guide, it's written there that you need to follow exactly what's prescribed to call it Scrum. Otherwise, if you are cutting off some parts of it, they are saying that it might add value, but you cannot call that Scrum, which is also good. But again, if your focus is delivering value, if you use part of that, it brings value to you. Might bring more or less value if you follow 100%, but that's also a different discussion. But you need to keep in mind here that value optimization, it's nothing more than prioritization and decision making based on Pareto. But if the only way that you can make a Pareto analysis, if you understand what's your scope, what are your constraints. By constraints can be budget constraints, time constraints, quality constraints. what are the requirements from the customer, what are your resource constraints, and based on that, you're going to be able to take a decision, a educated decision, and decide, okay, this is my priority list. Those are the top items that I want to work first because those are the items that are can bring the highest value, or they are more critical for the next steps that you need to develop in your project. Second, again, feedback loops. Feedback loops are quite important. And I've worked in a lot of projects that are waterfall, and that myself and the team we use feedback loops. And there's even like if you work with automotive, the basically the automotive process to develop a new product has different stages where you have different maturities of products that you are going to deliver. In each of those maturities of the products, there are feedback loops. Of course, depending on the product, it will be really hard to get something done in 1 month. Why? Because then you need to buy raw material, you need to produce components, you need to assemble everything, and then you need to put this on testing. Sometimes it's not feasible to do that in this time frame, but that does not mean that you should not think about on having as short as possible feedback loops. Because if you have, for example, a sample for a product, you can try it and you can test it. If it fails and you can understand why it fails, you can improve. But if you do not, so faster that you can make those tests, easier is faster you can learn if it works or not. So those short feedback loops, they are very critical for what you need to do. And here it can be a product, can be a service, can be a request from the customer. Um, and mainly when you're talking about software development, it gets very critical because it's very abstract. It's much more difficult to explain what you need if you're creating a software that's completely new, because you kind of do not know how it's going to look like, how you're going to use it. But of course, if you're talking about a house, it's much easier to describe what you want. You can just show a picture. That's what I want. Then you can make a drawing. But for software, it does not work exactly like that. That's why those feedback loops on software they are so valuable. And again, when you are talking about as short as possible feedback loops, does not mean that you're not going to need to plan it. Because having something an MVP for a piece of software can be something really fast. Have an MVP for a bridge, that really starts to be not so easy to imagine. Even though you can do some parts of design and you can do some inspections in some steps of your construction, you need to think about when you are talking about the speed of those feedback loops, what's the impact if you need to rework something? What's the risk that you have there? What's the cost? Because if your feedback loop is so long, maybe you have a feedback loop of 6 months, better to make sure that you invest a higher amount of time in planning to make sure that your feedback loop can be right the first time. Then just doing a sprint planning, there maybe 4 hours, 8 hours, jump into execution, execute it for 6 months, and figure out that is not going to work like that. Then you need another 2 or 3 months before you fix it. And sometimes the cost is very high. So of course you need to take those into consideration when you are talking about shorter feedback loops. But it does not mean you cannot use it all. And that's what's important here. And the last again, when you talk about high performing teams, leadership development, Scrum Guide gets this very, very right. And that's why it gets, when you talk about Agile and also when you talk about Scrum, that's why it gets that importance, because when they start to talk about the values of the team, they start really talk about leadership and focusing on that a lot when we talk about the framework. Maybe 10 years ago, PMBOK, they were just looking into the process. And of course, they were also talking about leadership. Leadership is important. Yeah, but that leadership was a piece of, I don't know, 600 pages there. And with not that much focus as you have, for example, in the Scrum Guide. So of course, again, they have they did something that was really amazing. They took something that was very important and they really put all these spots there. But does not mean that because you're not following Scrum that you should not have there. You should not have those things. And does not mean that those things they should not be in any type of project, regardless the framework, if you want to be successful. So understanding those things help you to see, okay, even if you're following waterfall, how you can optimize the value, how you can shorten your feedback loops, how you can empower and develop your team and your leaders. Because in the end, that will give you a competitive advantage, and that will bring much more value for the company. And if you can do those things right, it will bring much more value for you as a professional, and of course, higher the value that you can bring, higher your salary that you can have. If you can bring a value of 100, you're not. It will be very difficult to have a salary of 150. That's not sustainable in the long term. So continue to learn, continue to study, continue to learn those different frameworks. They help you to see different ways how to add value, and of course, they help you to progress into your career, maybe to higher positions, maybe progressing for better, maybe for better opportunities, for better salaries, and so on. So this is quite important and very critical for you if you want to succeed as a project manager. I hope you like this content. I know that Scrum is a topic that usually people they want to hear a lot. Some people they really do not know what's Scrum and how it works in practice. What I want to make sure that you understand that those three key points there, they are very relevant. They're very important for any type of project that you're executing. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this is part of the project, the content of the project management journey. That's an event that I'm going to talk about to how to further develop your project management career there. If you're interested in that, please subscribe in the link, it's free. Please also let me know if you have questions about this content. I would love to hear your comments or your feedback, or also maybe if you have suggestions for future content, just let me know. Please, if you like the content, click the button like it. Make sure you share with people, other people that might be interested in that. Also, if you want more content, make sure that you follow my YouTube channel here, but also make sure that you follow my Instagram account. There I also share daily content with a very broad range of topics from project management, from waterfall, Scrum, Lean, leadership, and so on. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon. Bye!